A millionaire ordered his magnificent bull to be killed for profit, but his command was met by the sight of his own son standing in tears. What happens next will leave you speechless. The barn door creaked open, spilling a sliver of pale lantern light across the straw-covered floor. Aaron Marlowe pressed his back against the wooden frame, his small hands trembling as he clutched the rough edge. His chest tightened with every word he heard inside, the low murmur of men's voices mixing with the distant restless snorts of the great bull in the stall. His father's voice carried louder than the rest, firm, sharp, and final. "He'll fetch a fine price," Victor Marlowe declared, the weight of authority in his tone leaving no room for doubt. The millionaire rancher stood tall, his broad shoulders outlined in the flickering light. His leather coat caught the glow like polished steel, and his dark eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Titan's strength is unmatched. Those breeders will pay triple, and when they see his horns, they'll know he's worth every coin. The other men chuckled, nodding in agreement. They were strangers, rough men with thick coats, wide hats, and hard eyes that swept the barn like hunters sizing up prey. Their boots scraped the dirt, their voices carrying a greedy edge as they exchanged comments about how the bull would fare in the rings, about how long he would last before being broken. Aaron's stomach twisted. He glanced toward Titan's stall at the far end, the enormous beast shifting uneasily, his massive frame pushing against the wooden walls. The bull's dark eyes reflected the lantern light, glinting with something almost human: confusion, unease, maybe even fear. To anyone else, Titan was just livestock, but to Aaron, those eyes spoke louder than words. He pressed a hand to his mouth to keep from crying out. His heart pounded, and his body trembled as he stepped forward, unable to remain hidden. His voice, though small, broke through the men's talk. "You can't sell him," Aaron said, his words quivering. But there was an edge of desperation beneath the fear. His bare feet patted over the straw as he approached, his slight figure dwarfed by the looming adults. His blond hair fell across his forehead, damp with sweat, and his pale face carried the weight of sleepless nights. Victor turned, his brow furrowing as he looked at his son. His jaw tightened, his patience already frayed. "Aaron," he said with cold authority, "this is no business for you. Go back to your room." Aaron shook his head, his fists clenched tight at his sides. "He's not for sale. Titan isn't some number in your books. He's alive. He trusts me." His voice cracked, but he forced himself to keep speaking. "He saved me once when I was cornered by the bulls in the pasture. He listens. He understands. You can't just throw him away." The men chuckled, their laughter harsh, mocking. One leaned against a beam, smirking as he muttered, "The boy thinks the beast is his friend." Aaron's cheeks flushed with anger, but Victor's expression only hardened. His father's tall frame loomed closer, the air around him heavy with dominance. He spoke quietly at first, but every word carried sharpness. "Titan is an animal. He is mine. His purpose is profit. That's all he was bred for." Aaron's voice grew louder, his desperation pushing him past. "He's not just an animal. He's more than that. You don't see him the way I do." The silence that followed was heavy. Even Titan stirred, his hooves clattering against the stall floor, his breath rising in visible clouds. Victor's lips curled into a thin smile, but it wasn't kind. It was the smile of a man who had no patience for weakness. "You think your tears can change my plans?" Victor asked, his voice rising. His cane tapped against the ground, echoing like a hammer striking steel. "Do you think your words can buy hay or keep the ranch alive? No, boy. What keeps us alive is strength, and strength brings profit." Aaron stepped closer, standing barely a foot from his father now, his small form shaking but unyielding. His eyes burned with something Victor had never seen before, a quiet defiance. "Then maybe I don't care about profit. Maybe I care about him." The breeders shifted uncomfortably, one of them muttering, "He's got fire, this one." "Shame it won't change a thing." Victor's glare snapped to them, silencing the murmur before returning to his son. For a moment, the lantern's flicker revealed something fleeting in his face, annoyance, perhaps even doubt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He leaned forward, his voice sharp as a whip. "You will not speak again on this," he said. His hand clamped on Aaron's shoulder, fingers digging into the boy's thin frame. "You will not stand in the way of business. The bull is mine, and tomorrow he will be theirs." Aaron's body went rigid, but his eyes did not drop. He bit his lip hard enough to draw blood, tears burning his cheeks as he looked past his father toward Titan. The bull snorted, pawing at the floor, his muscles rippling with restrained power. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange Aaron felt a surge of strength he didn't know he had. He yanked his shoulder free, his voice trembling but steady. "If you sell him, you'll lose more than you think." Victor laughed, the sound low and sharp, filled with scorn. He straightened, releasing the boy as if dismissing him from existence. The breeders followed suit, smirking as they began discussing the details of tomorrow's deal. Their words blurred together, but Aaron barely heard them. His mind was a storm of fear and determination, his body trembling as he backed away toward the stall. Titan's heavy breath filled the air, and the boy reached a hand toward him, fingers brushing against the bull's hide. The animal calmed instantly, lowering his massive head until his horn almost touched Aaron's shoulder. It was in that moment Aaron knew he could not rely on anyone else. No plea, no word, no tear would sway his father. He was alone in this fight. Yet in that loneliness grew a seed of resolve. He would protect Titan, no matter what it cost. Victor's voice sliced through the barn one last time, final and absolute. He pointed his cane at his son, his eyes burning with cruel certainty. A boy's tears can't pay for feed. The clang of the iron gates echoed across the ranch yard like a war drum, sharp and final. Aaron flinched at the sound, his fingers tightening around the weathered wood of the fence. His throat was dry, his pulse quick and uneven, as he watched the men step onto the property. They were broad, heavy-shouldered men with hands like stone and eyes that carried no warmth. Their boots struck the ground with heavy confidence, their laughter cutting through the cold morning air like blades. Titan, locked inside the corral, snorted and pawed the dirt, his massive head swinging as though he sensed what was coming. Steam rose from his nostrils in thick clouds, each exhale sounding more like a growl than breath. The bull's muscles rippled beneath his hide, and his hooves struck the ground in restless protest. Victor Marlowe strutted at the center of it all, his polished boots crunching against gravel, his voice booming with pride as he addressed the newcomers. "Take a good look at him, gentlemen," he announced, sweeping his arm toward Titan as though unveiling a piece of treasure. "Not a beast alive matches his strength. He's fire wrapped in flesh, worth every coin and then some." His voice dripped with satisfaction, his chest puffed high, the gleam in his eyes sharper. The breeders whistled and jeered with approval, one leaning on the gate as he looked Titan over. "Fine shoulders, broad chest. He'll fight till he drops," the man said with a crooked grin. Another smacked the dust off his gloves and added, "He'll fetch a fortune when we put him in the ring." Their voices carried no admiration, only hunger. Aaron's stomach twisted. He gripped the post harder, splinters digging into his palms, but he couldn't loosen his hold. His father's words thundered in his ears, each one more painful than the last. Titan wasn't treasure. Titan wasn't a prize. He was a living soul, his only friend, the one creature who listened when no one else would. "Don't touch him!" Aaron's voice broke suddenly, louder than he intended. His body shot forward, carrying him past the startled men until he stood between the bull's stall and the crowd. His small frame looked fragile before them, but his arms were spread wide as if he could shield Titan with his body. Victor's face hardened instantly. "Aaron!" he barked, his voice striking like a whip. His son's name was more command than call. "Stand aside!" "I won't!" Aaron shouted back, his voice shaking but fierce. His eyes burned with tears, yet they glared at his father like embers refusing to die out. "You can't sell him! He's not yours to sell! He's my friend!" The men burst into laughter. "The boy's got a soft heart," one sneered. "Soft hearts don't last long." Another chuckled and shook his head, muttering, "Not fit for a rancher's son." Victor's patience snapped. He gestured sharply, and two of his hired hands moved forward. "Get him out of the way," Victor commanded. Aaron felt their hands grip his shoulders, rough and unyielding, dragging him backward no matter how he kicked or twisted. "Let me go," he cried, his voice breaking with anguish. "Titan! Titan! Don't let them!" The bull slammed his weight against the stall, the wood rattling so violently that the men stumbled. Dust rained from the beams, and for a heartbeat the laughter died away. Titan's roar filled the barn, deep and furious, shaking the air with raw power. Aaron's cry merged with it, his voice desperate and broken. Victor stepped forward, planting his cane firmly in the dirt. His jaw was tight, his glare fixed on his son. "You shame yourself, boy," he growled. "Do not make me say it again. Titan is not yours. He is mine, and soon he will be theirs. Now go inside before you disgrace yourself further." Aaron's chest heaved. He wanted to fight more, to tear away from the men holding him, but the grip on his arms was unyielding. His body sagged as they dragged him from the corral, though his eyes never left Titan. The bull's gaze found his, and in that silent moment something passed between them, a vow, unspoken but fierce. When the breeders finally turned back to Titan, their laughter returning, Aaron's world felt colder than it had ever been. He had failed. His father had silenced him, the men had mocked him, and Titan's fate had been sealed in coin. But as the sun dipped toward the horizon that day, a whisper of hope found him in the unlikeliest of places. Later, while the ranch yard settled into night, a rough hand tapped Aaron's shoulder. Startled, he turned and found Elias Ward standing there, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. The ranch hand's weathered skin and tired eyes spoke of years under the sun, and though his frame had bent with age, his voice carried quiet strength. "Don't lose heart, boy," Elias said softly, glancing around to be sure they were alone. "I've seen men like those breeders. They won't treat Titan kindly. Once they've got him, they'll break him with chains or bleed him in the rings. He won't last long." His tone was grim, but his eyes held a spark of understanding. Aaron blinked, swallowing hard. "Then we can't let them take him," he whispered, the tremor in his voice fading into something steadier. "We can't." Elias looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing something deep inside. Finally he nodded. "You've got fire, lad. More than your father knows. If you're going to act, you'll need courage. And you'll need to act tonight." The words lit something in Aaron's chest. He nodded quickly, determined. His hands still trembled, but now it was not with fear. It was with resolve. When the ranch was cloaked in darkness and the laughter of men had faded into snores from the bunkhouse, Aaron crept across the yard. The cold air stung his skin, but he kept moving, clutching the stolen key Elias had slipped him. His breath came fast, his heart racing as he reached the barn door. The lantern inside flickered low, casting long shadows across the hay. Titan shifted restlessly in his stall, his eyes flashing as Aaron approached. The boy fumbled with the key, his fingers clumsy from nerves, but at last the lock gave way with a soft click. "Easy, boy," Aaron whispered, pressing his forehead against the stall gate. "We're leaving. I won't let him take you." His words were tender, steadying his own racing thoughts as much as calming the bull. But before he could unlatch the final bar, another light flared across the barn, the sharp glow of a lantern, brighter, angrier. "Aaron!" The voice struck him like ice. He froze, the key still clutched in his hand, his blood draining from his face. Slowly he turned. Victor stood in the doorway, the lantern casting his face into hard shadows. His eyes blazed with fury, his cane gripped tight in his hand. He stepped forward, each stride deliberate, his boots echoing like judgment. Aaron's chest constricted. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words tangled in his throat. His father's glare left no room for reason, only punishment. "You dare!" Victor spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You dare steal from me! You dare defy me!" Aaron's grip tightened on the key. His legs trembled, but he did not back away. "I'm not stealing," he whispered, his voice small but steady. "I'm saving him." Victor's face twisted, his fury spilling over. He raised his cane and struck the stall fence, the crack resounding like thunder. Titan roared, rearing against the wood with such force the stall quaked. Aaron stumbled back, his heart lurching. The bull's massive horns slammed into the gate, splinters flying as wood cracked under the pressure. The air filled with shouts as men in the bunkhouse woke, their footsteps pounding toward the barn. Victor's lantern shook in his hand, his face pale with a sudden flicker of fear, even as his anger held. Titan lunged again, shaking the stall until the beams groaned. Dust rained down, and the whole barn seemed ready to split apart. Aaron stood frozen, watching the chaos unfold, the sound of his father's cane still ringing in his ears. He knew in that instant that he had crossed a line he could never retreat from, and his father knew it too. What began as a secret rescue had now become a public rebellion. Aaron realized he had crossed a line he could never retreat from, and Victor realized his son was no longer afraid to defy him. The morning air was sharp, heavy with the scent of dust and old hay, when Victor Marlowe gave the order. His voice, deep and seething with rage, cut through the silence of the ranch yard. "Bring the rifle," he commanded, pointing toward Titan's corral with his cane. His face was rigid, his jaw set as though carved from stone. The gathered men, half awake from the night's chaos, froze at the weight of his words. They exchanged uneasy glances, reluctant yet bound by the authority of their master. Aaron's heart dropped into his stomach. He stood at the fence, his fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his skin. His throat felt raw from shouting the night before, but he found his voice again, trembling yet defiant. "No, you can't! He's done nothing! Nothing to deserve this!" His words rang across the corral, desperate and piercing, but Victor didn't flinch. The boy's cries did not sway the men either. Their eyes shifted, uncertain, but none dared defy the millionaire whose wealth fed them. The rifleman stepped forward, hesitant, his hands shaky as he accepted the weapon. The sun had only just risen, spilling red light across the yard, but the scene already carried the weight of a battlefield. Titan stood behind the fence, his body tense, his dark eyes reflecting both fury and confusion. His breath came in great huffs of steam, curling into the cold air like smoke from a furnace. Victor lifted his hand, silencing his son's protests. "Enough," he said, his tone colder than steel. His gaze swept across the men, daring anyone to challenge him. "This beast is no longer an asset. He is a threat. He dies here now, and let this stand as a lesson." His words carried more venom than conviction, as though he needed the display to smother the humiliation his son had caused him the night before. Aaron pressed against the fence, his cheeks wet with tears, his chest heaving. His voice broke but carried a fierce edge. "This isn't about Titan. This is about you, about your pride. You don't care if he lives or dies, so long as no one dares to stand against you. But I will, Father. I will." A ripple passed through the men at those words. Some shifted uncomfortably, glancing between boy and father, the tension thickening. Elias Ward, standing among them with his arms crossed, did not speak, but his eyes followed Aaron with a quiet pride. Victor snapped his fingers. "Do it!" he ordered the rifleman. The rifleman raised the weapon, his hands unsteady. The long barrel caught the morning light, its gleam sharp and unforgiving. The man's finger hesitated at the trigger, his breathing ragged as Titan shifted, pawing the dirt, snorting. The bull's muscles bunched beneath his hide like coiled ropes ready to snap. Aaron's voice cracked as he screamed, "Stop! Please, don't!" But his cries were drowned in the charged silence of men waiting for violence. The trigger pulled, but in that very instant, Titan erupted. The bull lunged against the corral with an explosion of force that shook the ground. Wood splintered, boards cracked, and the air filled with a deafening roar of rage. Men shouted and scrambled back as dust rose in clouds, choking the yard. The rifle's shot went wide, echoing uselessly into the open field beyond. Aaron's body jolted with the chaos, but instead of fleeing, he moved forward. His legs trembled, his heart thundered, yet he pushed past the fear clawing at him. He stumbled into the open path of Titan's charge, his small frame dwarfed by the beast's size. "Titan!" he shouted, his arms raised high, his palms open in surrender and faith. His voice rang through the confusion, not commanding but pleading, desperate yet certain. The men gasped. Some cried out warnings, expecting to see the boy crushed in an instant. But the ground-shaking thunder of Titan's hooves slowed, then stopped. Dust swirled around them as the massive bull lowered his head, inches from Aaron's chest. His nostrils flared, hot breath rushing over the boy, but his horns did not rise. Instead, Titan bowed low, his great body stilling as though recognizing the courage in the trembling figure before him. The silence that followed was deeper than any shout. Aaron lowered his arm slowly, his own breath ragged, and reached toward Titan's muzzle with shaking fingers. The bull huffed, nudging him softly, a gesture of trust that no man there could deny. Elias stepped forward, his weathered voice breaking the stillness. "Look at him! You see it, don't you?" His arm swept toward the pair. "That boy you mocked has done what none of us could. The beast bows to him, not to fear, not to chains, but to loyalty. That's no weakness, that's strength." The men murmured, some nodding, others shifting uneasily. Their eyes, once skeptical, now carried something like respect as they looked at Aaron. The boy they had seen as fragile had stood firm where grown men would not, and Titan himself had chosen to honor him. Victor's face darkened, his cheeks burning red. The sight of his empire unraveling, his authority crumbling before his workers, was unbearable. His lips curled back as he stepped forward, his cane forgotten in the dirt. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from humiliation twisted into fury. "You dare defy me in front of my men," he hissed at Aaron, his eyes blazing. "You think this display makes you stronger than me? You think a beast's bow makes you worthy?" He turned, his hand snatching the rifle from the stunned marksman. "I'll show you what it means to defy Victor Marlowe." Aaron froze. His father's eyes were no longer fixed on Titan. They were locked on him. Victor lifted the rifle, his hand steady now, his anger sharpening his focus. He raised the barrel, pointing it directly at his son's chest. His voice carried across the yard, each word heavy with finality. "No more rebellion, no more weakness. If you will not learn obedience, then you will not live to shame me further." Gasps rippled through the men. Some stepped forward, but none dared move fast enough. Elias shouted, "Victor, stop! He's your son!" But Victor's finger tightened on the trigger. Aaron stood frozen, his breath caught in his lungs. He wanted to move, but his legs betrayed him. The sight of his own father aiming at him was a wound deeper than any bullet. His heart pounded, fear clawing at his chest, but another sound cut through the moment, the deep, thunderous bellow of Titan. The bull surged forward. In a blur of motion, Titan rammed into Victor with a force that cracked the air like a storm. The rifle fired wildly, the shot tearing harmlessly into the sky as Victor's body was hurled back. He collided with the corral fence, wood splintering beneath his weight, before crumpling into the dirt. The yard fell silent again, save for the heavy panting of Titan and the stunned whispers of the men. Dust settled slowly, revealing the once mighty Victor sprawled in the dirt, his cane out of reach, his rifle broken in 2 pieces nearby. His eyes flickered with disbelief, his body small and frail against the vastness of the ground he once commanded. The millionaire who once commanded power over all was now sprawled in the dirt, broken and powerless, as the men looked on in stunned silence. The sound of Victor Marlowe's groans echoed faintly through the halls of the ranch house. He lay in his wide oak bed, his chest tightly bound with bandages, his face pale and sunken, his breath labored. Once he had commanded the ranch with a booming voice and an iron will, but now even to sit upright left him trembling. The strike from Titan had broken more than ribs. It had broken the very image of invincibility he had spent a lifetime building. Outside, the ranch looked unchanged, yet within its walls, something deeper had shifted. The men no longer moved with the same fear of Victor's presence. They went about their work quietly, exchanging glances and whispers that carried a weight Victor could not silence. They had all seen it with their own eyes. The boy standing firm, the bull bowing its head, and Victor, master of the ranch, brought low by his own arrogance. By the 3rd day, the breeders who had once gathered eagerly in Victor's parlor rode away without ceremony. Their boots thudded against the porch, their expressions tight with disappointment. One of them, a stout man with gray in his beard, spat into the dirt before mounting his horse. "No one buys a beast that chooses who it listens to," he muttered, loud enough for Elias to hear. The others said nothing, but their silence was damning. The deal was gone. The money Victor had promised his men, the prestige he had boasted of, all vanished with the turning of hooves on the gravel road. Elias stood in the doorway, watching them disappear into the horizon. His weathered face betrayed no satisfaction, but inside he felt the stirrings of something like justice. The ranch, once driven by profit and cruelty, now stood at a crossroads, and it was not Victor who would decide its future. That evening in the bunkhouse, the men gathered around the fire. Their voices were low at first, careful, as though afraid Victor might still rise from his bed and strike them down. But as the night wore on, their words grew stronger, bolder. "I saw it clear as day," one of the ranch hands said, leaning forward, his hands clasped together. The bull lowered his head to the boy, not out of fear, out of respect. Another nodded, his eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Never seen anything like it. We all know what Titan did to Victor, but he stood still as stone for Aaron. Maybe the boy's got something we don't understand." The room fell silent as Elias rose from his seat. His voice, though quiet, carried weight. "Maybe it's time this ranch found a new way," he said, his gaze moving from face to face. "Victor built it on fear, on breaking beasts until they bowed. But what if we built it on respect? What if Titan stayed, not as property, not as profit, but as a symbol? Men will come from miles just to see him, not chained, not beaten but standing free with the boy beside him." The men looked at each other, the idea hanging heavy in the air. It was bold, almost impossible, but it stirred something deep inside them. "A story like that," one finally whispered, "could outlast all of us." But when Elias presented the idea to Victor the next morning, the rancher's face twisted with fury despite his weakened state. His hand shook as he gripped the bedpost, his voice ragged but filled with venom. "You think I'll let a boy and a beast ruin everything I've built?" he rasped. "That animal should have been slaughtered the moment it was born. And the boy, he's nothing but a dreamer. You'll all end up starving if you follow him." Victor tried to rise, but the pain in his chest forced him back down. His rage crumbled into a bitter cough, his body betraying the strength his words pretended to carry. For the first time, his voice carried no power. It was Aaron who stepped forward, standing at the foot of the bed. His hands were clenched, but his eyes were steady. "You raised your rifle at me," Aaron said, his voice trembling with the memory but growing stronger with each word. "Not because of Titan, but because you couldn't stand losing control. I won't let you decide what happens anymore. Not to him, not to me, not to this ranch." Victor's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. The boy he had dismissed, the son he had once called weak, now spoke with the authority of a man. The men sided with Aaron, quietly at first, then with certainty. They followed him out of the room, leaving Victor to choke on his fury in silence. From that day forward, the ranch began to change. The whips and prods were hung up and left to gather dust. Titan, once seen as a danger to be subdued, was tended with care. His wounds were cleaned, his hide brushed, and his strength slowly returned. And always, it was Aaron who stood at his side. Each morning the boy brought feed in his arms, speaking softly to the massive creature. Titan, who had once shattered fences and scattered men with a single charge, now lowered his head to Aaron's touch, snorting gently as if in greeting. The men watched in awe. Where they had once trembled, Aaron stood calm, fearless, as though bound to the bull by something stronger than chains. Visitors began to arrive, first out of curiosity, then in greater numbers. They wanted to see the boy and the beast, to hear the story of how Titan had bowed to him. The ranch no longer drew attention for its wealth, but for something rarer: respect. Yet even as life settled into this new rhythm, Aaron carried a wound deeper than flesh. At night, when the fires burned low and the ranch lay quiet, he would see it again: the barrel of his father's rifle, the cold certainty in Victor's eyes. That betrayal cut through him like no scar could heal. Still, from that pain, something greater had risen. Aaron had learned that compassion, mocked as weakness, could tame not just a beast, but the very hearts of men. He stood taller now, his voice no longer ignored, his courage undeniable. The boy who once wept in the dirt had become the master of the ranch, not through wealth, not through cruelty, but through courage. And the irony lingered like a shadow in the corners of the ranch house. Victor had tried to kill the bull for profit, yet in the end, his empire survived only because his son saved it. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of greed, compassion, and the deep emotional bonds that can exist between humans and animals. This narrative aims to highlight the value of life, inspire empathy, and remind us that some things are worth more than any price.